There was a topic that they discussed this morning on Hockey Central, and I thought, it's an interesting topic in that we're in this society now where there's 24/7 media, which includes sports. I'm part of that. And the pressure on young guys is pretty insane right now because they're kids. And we don't see them that way. We did 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now it's changed somehow. Gretzky won his first cup at 23. Lemieux won his first cup when he was 25. Brett Hull won his first cup at 34. Sakic at 26. Yzerman at 32. Patrick Roy, I got under here at 20 because, Patrick Roy is worth mentioning. Now, in recent years, Crosby at 21, Malkin 22, Kane 21, Taves 22. So the bar got raised for the young kids, and it got lowered in terms of when you're expected to win. Win now. Guys who are on entry-level contracts, win now. That wasn't a problem during this era. So the 84 Oilers that Gretzky won with, other Hall of Famers on the team were Messier, Coffey, Anderson, Fuhrer, Curry. The 91 Penguins with Lemieux had Recchi, Mullen, Coffey, Trottier, and Francis. I almost undid the John Cullen trade there, and then I switched back. So both Gretzky and Lemieux, when they won Stanley Cups, and they held them up, and everybody talked about how great they were, they had a great supporting cast. Now, when the Penguins won in 09, they didn't have that all-star Hall of Fame supporting team, but they had a veteran in Guerin, veteran in Gonchar. Kunitz played a good role. He's 29 years of age at the time. And Marc-Andre Fleury, pretty solid goaltender who had gone through this before. So he was experienced. The 2010 Hawks had Keith, Hossa, Sharp, and Byfuglien. I would argue right now that Keith probably Hall of Famer. Hossa's definitely a Hall of Famer. Sharp and Byfuglien, borderline, if he can play long enough, right? Sharp, not a Hall of Famer, but as an older player, was able to be a leader. And it's important because right now McDavid's 20, Eichel's 21, Matthews is 20. Gaudreau and Stamkos I've got up here because they're older. Gaudreau's 24 and Stamkos is 27. The pressure on Stamkos was not the same as what we're seeing on McDavid, Eichel, and Matthews. And it's starting to wear. It's like this morning they said, well, Matthews didn't get a shot last night. Is that concerning? No. Matthews may not be 100%. He may still be nursing whatever injury kept him out for 4 games. And I wouldn't be surprised. But the micromanagement that goes on with players right now is insane. And I look at Jack Eichel, for instance. He's 21. Now, I've written down, here's your support guys. In Edmonton, it's Draisaitl, it's 22. Lucic, 29. Maroon, 29. But Lucic only has 4 goals. So, they aren't... Maroon had a career year last year. He's not going to repeat. Lucic at 29 is already showing signs of wear and tear from all those years of physical play. In Toronto, you've got Kadri, who's 27. Yeah, he's getting older, isn't he? JVR's 28. I still think they'd be insane to trade him. Marleau at 38 and Hainsey at 36. Those are important key differences between what Toronto's got and what Edmonton's got. So while everybody wants to point and say, I think Matthews is better than McDavid, my point is the supporting cast in Toronto is better than the supporting cast in Edmonton. So even though Matthews is not scoring as many points per game as McDavid, he doesn't have to because it's a better cast of characters around him. The goaltending's been more solid throughout the season than Talbot's been in Edmonton. So there's a big difference between what these teams are playing with. In Buffalo, you've got O'Reilly, who's 26, Pominville at 35, Okposo at 29. Like, I'm trying to look for, anybody who can fit into this category of what these teams had when they won Stanley Cups. Either Hall of Fame here, or your veteran leaders, guys who've been there before, or guys who just are capable of getting through that because they're not kids. What's going on in the NHL, and I did that video yesterday on how the NHL is getting younger, and it is. It's getting younger. And it's getting sloppier, as I said. But it's also putting more and more pressure on kids who are younger than a crop from a generation ago. Gretzky didn't win the cup when he was 21. The Oilers were going through frustration after frustration. They would get to the playoffs, and then they'd lose. And the narrative out of that was, you can't win in the Stanley Cup playoffs playing Edmonton hockey. They have to change their style. They have to change their team. You can't score your way to a Stanley Cup. You have to have the defense. They never changed their style, really. They just got better. Lemieux and the Penguins, they were abysmal the first couple of years he was there. And by the time they built up, well, look, they went out and got a bunch of veteran guys. Trottier had won 4 Stanley Cups before that with the Islanders. He knew how to win. Coffey had won with Edmonton. He knew how to win. And Francis had been through a lot of crap in Hartford, but he had learned to be a leader in Hartford. Francis was a leader in Pittsburgh. Yes, Lemieux was the face of the franchise, and he was the guy who carried the Stanley Cup, and all the pictures from that time are of him and how great he was, and he was. But without Ron Francis, that doesn't happen. There is no Ron Francis in Buffalo. There is no Ron Francis in Edmonton. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is fine. He's not Ron Francis. So the pressure that exists on these kids isn't just to be good. It is, why aren't you the best? Like, for instance, they talked about McDavid this morning and the fact that he's, I think, tied for 5th in the league in scoring. And when asked, both McLean and Kiprio said they hadn't been overly impressed with him this year. Now, he's 20 years old. He's tied for 5th in the league in scoring, and it hasn't been impressive. I've been impressed only because he hasn't regressed. I've been impressed because throughout Edmonton's problems, he hasn't been a noisy issue-causing player. Like Eichel in Buffalo right now, you could argue has been an issue. And Eichel, you could also argue, gets paid too much money. Part of the issue that's now affecting teams, and I know people are going to say this in the comment section, because these young kids get paid a lot more than these guys did coming out of their entry-level contracts, the pressure on them to win is greater right now because these kids are getting paid $10 million as soon as that's done. 10, 12 million. This could be 13 million for Matthews. The pressure to win is right now. But when you look historically, Hall of Fame guys don't necessarily win Stanley Cups starting at age 21. Guys retire at 36, 37, sometimes 40, and you might see 3 or 4 Stanley Cups in there. We talk about how great they are because they have 3 or 4 Stanley Cups to their name. Imagine if McDavid's retiring in 15 years and he's got 3 Stanley Cups. People might be saying, yeah, but look at the 12 years he didn't make it. What happened there? Because of the amount of pressure that's put on these guys. Because of the amount of expectation that's put on them. And the other issue with it is this. Because there's more pressure to throw these kids to the wolves, how many of them are going to burn out? How many of these guys that are star players at 19 and 20 are we going to be talking about 10 years down the road and say, man, he had such a great start to his career. It's a shame that the league burned him out. It's a shame that they put him into the lineup as the number 1 guy. They built a team around him. And he wasn't physically ready, he wasn't mentally ready, and he didn't have the experience necessary to be able to handle that 82-game grind as the guy. The pressure on Jack Eichel right now in Buffalo is, hey, you're making $10 million next year? Okay, you are the guy. You're it. Now go out there and prove it. And he has to prove it every single night. You can't have a night off because there's cameras everywhere, and there's 16,000 people who are on their phones tweeting out, hey, he sucks right now. Look at this play he made. This is terrible. There is more micromanagement of players now than 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. And it makes it, I really don't envy these kids. I don't care how much money they're making. And it's not their fault. I always found that funny too when, you look at Eichel's pay and you'll go, well, that's just crazy. He's not worth that. And look what Boston paid for Pasternak, and Pasternak's a better player. And that's just stupidity. And then people get mad at Eichel. And the way that I always equate it is this. If I go into my boss next week and I say, I deserve $75 an hour. And my boss goes, oh, okay. Stamp that. All right, here, you get $75 an hour now. and my coworkers find out I'm making $75 an hour. Now, is that my fault or is that the boss? I mean, if your boss comes to you and says, hey, I've decided you're going to make $6 million next year, your answer isn't going to be, well, geez, boss, look at all these other guys and what they're making. I don't know that I've earned that yet. You're going to be calling the Lamborghini dealership and figuring out what color you want. It's not. So I feel bad for these kids in that they go into this negotiation, they get exactly what they want, the team gives them what they want, and then the pressure on them from fans, from media, from the team is based on what the team was willing to give them. I still remember going back to 80s and before salary caps and all that. I still remember teams playing hardball with players. And I remember when there, and it wasn't that long ago, when there was a time that if a player was asking for an unreasonable salary, he just wouldn't get it. And now that really doesn't happen very often. I can think of Chris Russell when he went into free agency, not this past summer, but the year before, where his want was much more than what he ended up getting. But for the most part, a player comes out and says, I think I'm worth $8 million over the next 7 years. And the team goes, okay, sold. Cool. All right, there we go. For the next 8 years, he's our guy. This is why 8-9 year contracts drive me kind of crazy. Because, you know, hockey landscapes change from year to year, from month to month in some cases. And the idea that you get player A and he's going to be just as good 8 years from now as he is now, and your team's like, it's kind of crazy. Unless it's a franchise guy. Unless it's a number one guy who's proven himself for a while, you're taking a huge risk. But again, I don't blame the kids. I blame the GMs and the teams that go, yep. And they rubber stamp that huge raise. They rubber stamp that big money. And I do think that there are kids in this game who are going to get burned out. There is a chance, and I mean, fans don't want to hear it. There is a chance that someday down the road, Patrick Laine could be going, you know what, I have too much pressure in Winnipeg, I want out. Matthews says, you know what, I'm carrying the Leafs, and I'm under constant scrutiny. I'd like to go to Arizona and have a life. Connor McDavid could say, I'm done. There's an ineptitude here in Edmonton. I just can't get it done here. I want to go somewhere else. That could happen. And these contracts could really tie these guys to those franchises and make them unmovable. Or if they are movable, you have to, just the amount of money that these guys make, the amount of pressure on them and on teams. And then on a team, if you're going to trade one of these guys and it's this huge contract, you're going to have to take back probably bad money in order to make room on that team's salary structure for this guy. Like, and again, I know everybody looks right now and they look at a lot of these contracts and they say, oh, these are great. This is perfect. Oh, good. We signed everybody for the next 6 years. We're good. You're good as long as your team is good for the next 6 years, and you can't say for sure whether or not they're going to be good next year. You look at playoff turnover and how many teams are in the playoffs that were out and how many teams go out that were in, and if you're tied to all of these salaries for these players and your team's not good enough to win, then what? And in the end, the pressure's still going to come back to the kids. It's still going to come back to them. And by the time they're 29, like in Milan Lucic, we may be talking about how, well, their best days are behind them. They're clearly in decline. Something needs to be done because they've been forced into tough minutes from day one. They've taken a physical punishment from day one. Maybe they've worked through injuries from day one, because when you're making that money, the pressure to work through an injury, and right now, like, I look at Austin Matthews and whether or not he's still hurting, and I say to myself, you know what? There's a pressure on him to play even if he is hurt, because there's a perception that he is it. He's the guy. And he may feel that, all right, because I'm the guy here, I have to go out there and play. Yeah, my back hurts, and it's hard to skate, and it's hard to bend over and tie my skates, but I got to play. I can't afford to take the night off because they won't, so I have to play. And that does enter into it, and then that can lead to a back problem. Something that goes from year to year to year. Ask Mario Lemieux. Lemieux was a big guy. Lemieux was huge. He was a beast out there. But once his back went, he was very vulnerable. And he wasn't the same guy. And somebody out of the young stars will end up in that situation. And again, 8-year contracts, $13 million a year. The pressure is immense. Maybe their backs will hurt just from having to carry franchises. Because the interesting thing is, here's Edmonton, Buffalo, and Toronto. 3 of the least successful franchises over the last decade. I know Toronto had a good year last year, but before last year, 3 of the least successful franchises over the last decade. 3 fan bases that desperately want to see a winner. The pressure on these kids is real. Meanwhile, Johnny Gaudreau has had his ups and downs with Calgary and hasn't been under that same scrutiny because he plays in Calgary. He isn't expected to be Connor McDavid. He isn't expected to be what Auston Matthews is expected to be in Edmonton or in Toronto. He's just expected to be Johnny Hockey. And he's been very good. Stamkos, almost no pressure in Tampa. Coming back off a major injury last year, and he's been sensational, and he's scoring tons of points. And oh hey, he's 27 and he hasn't won a Stanley Cup yet. Can you imagine 7 years from now if Matthews hasn't won a Stanley Cup in Toronto? All the conversation would be is, will this team ever win a Stanley Cup with Matthews? I haven't heard that about Stamkos. And Stamkos has a fantastic supporting cast in Tampa, so that if he has a bad night, nobody's even going to notice. Can't say the same about Matthews, Eichel, and McDavid right now, but Matthews is close. Because they've Lou Lamoriello, understanding how to do this, has put a team around Matthews that can win without him. Edmonton and Buffalo have not. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And again, let me know, what do you think? Is there too much pressure on these kids to perform, and is it going to burn them out at an early age? Is it going to burn them out at an early age? That is better. Again, let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.